The 1930s began with the United States facing one of its most challenging periods in its history. In the early 1930s, 1 out of every 4 Americans was out of work. For those fortunate enough to have a job, the average wage was about $1,500 a year, or about 72 cents an hour. With the onset of a prolonged drought in 1930, over-farmed and overgrazed land in the Southwest began to blow away. Violent dust storms could darken the skies for days. In May of 1937, the German airship Hindenburg caught fire and was destroyed while trying to land in New Jersey. The event was captured live on newsreel with the voice of Herbert Morrison describing the horrific event.
Standing still now. They've dropped ropes out of the nose of the ship, and has been taken a hold up down on the field by a number of men. The back motors of the ship are just holding it just enough to keep it. It bursts into flames. Wait, get it started. It's fighting, and it's rising terrible. Oh my, get out of the way, please. It's burning, bursting into flames, and it's falling on the mooring mast, and all the folks between us. This is terrible. This is one of the worst catastrophes in the world. Oh, it's like 400 or 500 feet into the sky, and it's a terrific crash, ladies and gentlemen. The smoke and the flames now, and the flame is crashing to the ground, not quite to the mooring mast. All the humanity and all the passengers screaming around me. I don't.
In 1934, a gallon of gas cost 10 cents, while a loaf of white bread was only 8 cents. For those who could afford it, a new kit home from the Sears catalog could be bought for $869, while a brand new Studebaker pickup truck was $625. In November of 1932, Franklin D. Roosevelt became the 32nd President of the United States, while at the same time in Europe, a young German politician named Adolf Hitler was also rising to power.
Meine deutsche Jugend, nach einem Jahr kann ich euch hier wieder begrüßen.
The Academy Award for the Best Picture in 1934 went to It Happened One Night with Clark Gable, and the top-selling song of 1934 was Moonglow by Cab Calloway. One other notable event in 1934 occurred on September 22nd in the town of Fulton, Illinois.
State your name.
Betty DeGunther. My maiden name was Dykhuis.
And where and when were you born?
I was born in Fulton, Illinois, in my grandmother's house. My dad was a Hollander from Fulton, and my mother was a German from Clinton, and a German Lutheran, which was not quite as bad as a Catholic, but almost. And Fulton was a Dutch Reformed community. My dad came from Chicago. His parents moved from Chicago, and he told my brother that they moved when they saw him going along the walls and putting his finger in bullet holes where bullets had entered. And they decided it would be a good idea to get out of that neighborhood, and they moved to Fulton.
Describe your mom.
My mother was this little lady, feisty as all get out. She could be the life of the party. And she did not like living in Fulton. And it felt like my dad dug his heels in, and they stayed there. She always wanted to go back to Clinton. She couldn't drive a car. My dad taught all the girls in the family how to drive, but he wouldn't teach my mother. So she had no means of moving around. I think that would have made her more content. It would have given her some freedom.
Describe your father, your dad.
My dad was not an easy man. He had no sense of humor. Never heard him tell a joke. He was uneducated. He should have been educated. He was very, very gifted in certain ways. But he would go to work, come home, and we had to have dinner. We called it supper at 5 o'clock, not any later than that. We all sat down, ate, no talking at the table. And then he went off and did woodworking or things that he enjoyed doing. So he was like an aloof father.
Did he show affection to the kids?
No. He was the ruler of the house. And when I say my dad was the ruler, I meant it. What he said was law. And you didn't argue. You didn't discuss. You didn't argue. You had to just do what you were told.
And what if you didn't? What happened?
I never didn't, on purpose anyway. Probably inadvertently I did, but never on purpose.
Describe the relationship between your mother and your father.
They loved each other, but they bickered. The relationship between them was not ideal. And as a kid, my dad would probably really feel hurt if he knew this, but I knew I would never marry anybody like him. And I didn't.
What did your dad do for a job? I know he had a couple jobs.
When I was really young, he worked first for a company called Disbro, and then Curtis Company, and I believe they were companies that dealt with lumber. I think Curtis made cabinets, kitchen cabinets. I don't know what Disbro made, but he told me a story about one time when he was ripping lumber at Disbro, so that's about as much as I know about that. Then he worked on the railroad for all of 2 weeks and didn't like it and quit. Then he needed a job, and DuPont Company was building a new plant close to Clinton. And he worked there on construction. He told me he really didn't like that. But he had obligations at home, so he went to work every day. Then, when the construction was complete, they hired men to go inside the plant, and that's what he did, and he loved it. DuPont was very good to their employees. It was a clean and immaculate not just clean place to work, immaculate. And then he loved that job.
How many brothers and sisters did you have?
I had 2 sisters and 1 brother. I'm the oldest.
So how did you guys get along?
You know, we didn't have the internet. We didn't have the information that's out there now, both good and bad. So we did what we were supposed to. The Second World War was going on. There was more important things than teenage angst. The earliest childhood memory I have was when a storm came through Fulton, and there must have been a lot of wind and noise with it. My mother was frightened, and I remember sitting with her. I was on one side and my sister was on the other side, and she had her arms around us. It's all she knew to do, and we waited for the storm to pass. But I remember feeling her fright. We always got stopped by the military police, going over the bridge or returning from Clinton, because it was a vital bridge for transportation. If that had been put out, they would have had to go many miles in order to cross that river. We called it the pond, but it was no pond.
What are your favorite memories of your childhood?
I was in 2nd grade. We did the operetta Little Black Sambo. I was a singing monkey. I remember the song. I remember songs that we learned. I remember a song from 1st grade. I just wrote to a classmate, and she has no memory of it. But I remember that little ducky duddle went wading in a puddle quite small. Says he, it doesn't matter how much I splash and splatter, for I'm just a duckling after all. I had a choir director one time said, what you remember from Sunday school are the songs you sing. That's true. I don't remember the lessons given in Sunday school, but I remember the songs we were taught. People then didn't go out shopping. Well, our shopping consisted of going to the grocery store and getting what we needed. And as I said, it wasn't on display. Of course, it was behind the counter, but we didn't just go and look and decide which brand we would get, but when it came to the Sears catalog, that's where we could shop. We could look and see what everything was available. It was sort of like Amazon.com in book form. And then, oh my, the Christmas catalog came, and that was the best time. Just looking at all those toys. Oh, something that I was thinking about the other day. My mother taught herself how to sew, and she made our clothing. And at Christmas, sometimes she made us new pajamas. Well, she would send us off to school, and we came home for lunch every day. So she'd work on the pajamas in the morning. By the time it was time for lunch, then she'd have to put everything away. And afterwards, after we left, she'd get it out again. And so she was so careful. But on Christmas Eve, we put our packages in a pile. It was not meted out to us, gift by gift. We had a pile, and when we got up on Christmas morning, we opened our pile. But it was Christmas Eve, and my mother is down under the tree with us, and she said, "Here, put your pajamas there." And then she realized what she had said. But we were always happy to get new pajamas. We didn't have that many clothes. Like I said, it was the Depression. We came out of the Depression, well, the war brought some prosperity, and we just didn't have that much. And you know what? We honestly didn't need that much.
You talked about the dolls.
Oh, yeah. I picked out this beautiful, beautiful doll. And it was $2. I remember $2. And my mother insisted that my sister and I had exactly the same things. She equated that with not ever playing favorites. So my mother is looking at the dolls with us, and she's, "Oh, this one is better." It was $1. And she really did talk it up. I still wanted the other one, but on Christmas morning, my sister and I each got the $1 doll. Must have been pretty young then. We took our dolls with us when we visited my grandmother in Clinton. And we were probably mostly asleep when my parents came home. So we forgot our dolls. And my dad stopped on his way home from work and picked up our dolls, and they called us in, and there they were, sitting up on the sofa. And I can remember our saying, "Our babies!" I loved dolls when I was young. Only one of my girls liked dolls. My oldest daughter got a doll buggy for Christmas, and she loaded it up with books. That's what she pushed around the house. Right. When I was in grade school, we called it, I guess I didn't have a favorite subject, frankly. I wasn't brilliant. So it wasn't until I was in middle school, junior high, that I decided I would get A's. And I really had to work at it. So I didn't have any favorite Teachers, if the teacher was nice, I liked him.
What about high school? What are your favorite classes or subjects in high school that you were involved in?
Of course, the ones I liked best were the ones I got the best grades in. My favorite, all-time favorite class in high school was world history. And it was taught by the man who was the coach, basketball, football coach at Fulton, and he had been a prisoner of war. And he had great insight and great compassion. And he seemed to love teaching ancient history, and I loved it too. I liked algebra, but I wasn't a directed student in high school. I was expected by my parents to attend and graduate from high school, but that was the end of it. There was no expectation for college. In fact, it was a big disappointment to my parents that I wanted to go, and I did go 1 year. So some of the classes I thought I was so smart not having to take in high school would have served me well in college.
You talked about a high school English teacher and you got her mad.
Oh, I did. I did.
Start the story with my high school English teacher.
My sophomore English teacher. I can't remember the problem, how it was put on the board, but I kind of corrected it, which made her furious, and she yelled at me. That's the only teacher I think who ever yelled at me. She yelled at me, and some stubbornness came out of me. I was the only one in the whole class who answered her questions. Well, after she yelled at me, she didn't have anybody in the class who answered her questions. I don't think she ever forgave me. I tried to be talked with her one time, but she really wasn't interested. So I burned that bridge. I didn't have much confidence in high school, and I wasn't athletic. I tried out for cheerleading, and I must have been the worst one. It was pathetic. No coordination. It was not a surprise to me that I didn't get chosen. I did have a part in the senior class play, but they couldn't get any boys to go out for the play, so we didn't have it. My one chance.
So what did teenagers do for fun?
Kids back then didn't have the entertainment opportunities that young people have now. I liked, as a youngster and all through high school, I liked the radio programs on Sunday afternoon. The Shadow knows. What evil lurks in the hearts of men, the Shadow knows. And there weren't any hour shows that we listened to, you know, maybe an hour and a half on Sunday afternoon. That'd be a full-time schedule for us. sometimes when I was younger, my parents would take us to a movie. That didn't happen too often. Oh, when I was in high school, we did have a movie theater in Fulton. So I like to go to musicals. The singing and the dancing always made me feel just special when I left.
Your first date in high school?
Oh, my first date was to a dance. And the boy came, he had dated this friend of mine and so it kind of shocked me that I was asked to this dance. And he brought me an orchid. And we led I think it's called the Grand March. So it was a very nice first date. Especially for somebody who only had 2 dates in all of high school.
Did you go out with this guy a second time after you brought you the orchid, or is that it?
No, he went back to this other girl.
Did you have a favorite song in high school that you remember, or movie, or things like that that stick out in your memory?
When I was a freshman and sophomore in high school, the woman who directed the chorus let anybody who wanted to sing in the chorus. There were no auditions. And it was great fun. And I remember one concert where we sang Fred Waring's arrangement of "'Twas the Night Before Christmas." And it was so much fun, and they kept clapping, the people in the audience, and we didn't have an encore prepared, so we did this one again. We could have, and I can still remember the words to that. So that's probably the most fun concert that we did. And then she left after my sophomore year. She taught us the classic songs. I suppose some of them are drinking songs. You know, "To the Tables Down at Maury," "To the Place Where Louis Dwells," "Ba Ba Ba." And it was through that one teacher that we learned music. I wonder if she gave us any Gilbert and Sullivan. She probably did. And then after she left, you had to audition for the chorus. And I wouldn't have been able to get a sound out. So I didn't. There was no sense in trying.
Did you have a job in high school?
Yes, worked in a place. See, I didn't work during school time, though. I'd work in the summer. Well, maybe my senior year I did have a job, and it was working in a place that served food. So one was a kind of, it had been a drive-in, and all the kids went there after the basketball games, and that was fun going there. Not fun working for them, though. Some people in the food industry are really crabby. So then I got a job at Good Enough's Dairy, and we'd watch her come down the hill in her car, and could see on the look on her face what kind of a night we were going to have. She was not a happy camper. And her husband died, so she was left running the place by herself. And I've always marveled. She remarried. And I can't imagine any man courting her. Maybe she courted them, I don't know.
What'd you do with the job at the dairy?
Made sodas and milkshakes, and she made food, so we had sandwiches, and there was a special salad. She had a special salad dressing that she made, and you'd put a scoop lettuce on the plate, a scoop of cottage cheese, and like a peach on top of that, and then the dressing would just spread out. It was delicious. So that was one of the house specialties, if you will. After my year in college, I came home and went to work at a place called Allen's, not bakery, something like that. And that paid 45 cents an hour. And it was, I did not like that place at all. Then I got a big promotion. I got a job as a waitress earning 65 cents an hour. I worked that until I got married. In the little town in which I lived during the war, it was, I remember not being, food being a problem. There was not a lot available. My mother went to the butcher shop and had what they called pork cutlets. I have no idea. I had no idea. I may have an inkling of what we were served. My mother would have died of embarrassment if she had known. It was delicious, but you know, life just went on. We were in a little community. I remember we would hear an airplane go over out, and we would go outside and look. And the pilot would be somebody called Billy Mitchell. And he was a pilot, and he came and flew over his mother's house. So that was pretty exciting. I think it was during the war that this eye doctor in town, Dr. Musk, died. And I don't know if he had been a pilot or not, but I remember at his funeral, a plane was in the air to commemorate him some way. And at the time, my mother called it, she said, the pilot did a falling leaf. Well, you know, my husband was in the Army as a pilot, and they put it into a spin. I remember that. That was very exciting. I'd never seen anything like that before. My husband, much later, flew over his mother's house, and he put it into a spin. I have a feeling that she was not that appreciative of it at the time. He was her little boy. So to show her, he put it, spun down. I knew that there were POWs in Clinton, German POWs. And over there in Clinton was a mental hospital for soldiers. Schick Army Hospital, it was called. And we called it, or they called it shell shock. Then I think you would call it,
ESD,
yes,
post-traumatic,
stress syndrome.
right?
Yeah. But I always had the feeling they were kind of dangerous over there.
How did you learn about things going on in the war?
The newspaper. The newspaper. It came about 4 o'clock, 4:30 every afternoon, and I didn't, as a little kid, didn't read the newspaper. So, but the headlines were huge. Those I saw. We weren't very worldly. Kids did not read the newspaper. Parents did, I remember that. But it's not like it is now.
As a child, what did the war mean to you?
I knew it was dangerous, but it wasn't right there. I knew that I had my father's 2 brothers were in the war, were in the service. One brother was a career soldier. The other brother was a prisoner of war in the South Pacific. But my parents didn't tell us that kind of stuff. I learned it afterwards. They just at that time didn't feel kids had to know all this. I was afraid that there'd be Japs, that's what they were called back then, in the bushes around my house. That frightened me. I'm not sure why. I never thought there'd be Germans in the bushes, but that's what I thought. You can see I wasn't very worldly. My mother's brother was in the service, and then he came home. He was injured, and I remember my grandmother's house. She had a front room, a living room, a dining room, and a kitchen all lined up. And the women from Zion Lutheran Church, the German Lutheran Church my grandmother belonged to, and my mother did too. These ladies came to serve, and I must have fixed the food too. There was a table that started in the front room, through the front room, through the living room, through the dining room, and the women who served coffee had to go outdoors to go around to the next door to get to the head of the table. I remember that. I think I must have been 11 or so. Maybe it was 10, I don't know, when he came home. So I had relatives in the service, and I remember in the windows they would put stars. And my mother's mother, her oldest son, who was 21 years older than my mother, he died in France. And he died of the flu and pneumonia. But she was a Gold Star mother. And then my other uncle was there, so that was, I don't know, White Star? I don't remember that. I just remember the plaques in windows with the stars on it, telling you that they had someone serving in the war. So that I remember. And collecting fat. Well, it was something we could do. I think we collected newspapers also. We didn't throw that stuff away. I think we collected newspapers. Oh, during the war, my dad raised rabbits and sold the meat. He didn't like that job very well. My husband and I attended the same little high school. He was 2 years ahead of me, and he had a girlfriend all through high school. And after I graduated, he asked me out. So we weren't high school sweethearts, but and then we were married like a year later. So we were 2 kids. He was 20, I was 18 when we got married. I was working for our first date, I was working at the dairy, and the owner gave the girls a ride home. We didn't walk. It was dark, and she always gave us a ride home. Well, I was to go out with my husband, and he must have been with a friend of his, or 2 friends, I can't remember this, but he parked in front of the dairy and just sat there. So I went home with the owner. She took me to my house, which kind of shocked him. I thought, I'm not walking out there. I don't know him. I mean, I knew who he was, but I had never been out with him before, and I wasn't about to dash out to the car and see if that's who it was. Well, that kind of surprised him, and they pulled up behind my ride home, and then we went out.
What'd you do on your first date, do you remember?
You know, I can't remember. Well, it couldn't have been too much because it was it was after work. So probably all we did was go get something to eat. It was too late for a movie, and stock cars were kind of fun, and we did that occasionally. Went to drive-in movies, went to the movies, or quite a few movies in Clinton. So that was our entertainment usually.
Was it love at first sight?
No, but I really liked him. No.
What'd you like about him?
He was so at ease, and he was in college. And you know, I liked that about people. I liked, and I still do, I like when people accomplish things. That's something that is attractive to me. And that's, he was in college, and very few people went to college from Fulton. Not too many in my class. There is a fellow who went as a non-traditional student. He graduated, I graduated. I don't know that there are very many more. So sure, I thought that was pretty attractive. He went to the University of Iowa, and that sounded really, really romantic.
So how long did you guys date before, or did he propose to you?
Not really. We just, it was an assumption that we would get married. We had only gone together for a short time when he told his mother that we would be married. He didn't tell me that. It would have frightened me.
So when did the word of marriage first come up?
Oh, it was just an assumption, okay? It was just assumed that we would, on the part of, I think he assumed it, and it was fine with me. That's how our marriage worked. He would like to do something, and if it sounded okay to me, you know, that was fine. I seldom said, I don't like that idea.
Did you have a big wedding?
Mm-hmm.
What was your wedding like? Describe your wedding.
We got married on an incredibly hot day in August. The record was beaten or equaled only a couple years ago. There was no air conditioning then. It was a very hot day. I remember I didn't get a piece of my wedding cake. At that time, the entertainment at wedding receptions was the bride and groom opening the presents. And of course, you had to have the proper expression on your face to show your appreciation. Receptions then weren't parties. And I remember opening all those presents, and it was very nice to have been given all those presents, but it took a while. I started to tell you about the things that my husband liked to do, and when we decided to get married, he took an extra semester of school at the university so that he could double up on ROTC and become an officer. And so when the time came in April of '56, then he was stationed at Fort Benning in Georgia. And we went down there for 4 months, and he decided he'd try for flight school, which is a big surprise to me. But he got it, and we had to report to Gary Air Force Base 5 days later. And then from Gary Air Force Base, we went to Fort Rucker, Alabama, and then to Manhattan, Kansas for 2.5 years. That was a nice stay.
So if you had to describe Richard in one word, what would you say about him? He was...
I think affable. People liked him. They liked him as a person. He was incredibly well liked as a judge. One of his law clerks told a newspaper reporter that when young lawyers came before him, he always instructed them to remember that what they did affected people's lives. My parents lived on the island, and I feel like they must have lived in an old houseboat, but or it might have been a little cabin. It wasn't much. And my mother, who could not swim, would row, my dad would row the boat across the river, the Mississippi, to the Shaw's candy factory where he worked. And then he stood on the bank and watched as my mother rowed home. R-O-W-E-D, rowed that boat. She couldn't swim at all. I don't know what he would have done if that boat capsized in the middle, because he couldn't have gotten to her. They wouldn't have had time. And the Mississippi is full of current, so that was kind of a dangerous crossing. But they didn't have any money. And I believe my dad earned 50 cents a week. And because he earned 50 cents a week, they did not qualify for what was called relief at that time. So my mother subsisted on creamed potatoes. And unlike Audrey Hepburn, who was very thin because of deprivation as a child, I didn't turn out that thin. I was in second grade. I was 7. And we came in to the classroom from recess, or perhaps it was noon, and kids had been playing on the playground, and one of the boys said, "Boy, did you see that crazy guy up there on the, we're all, up on the playground?" Well, I didn't, of course. And then it turned out it was, well, there was a boy who lived very close to the school who just missed the cutoff date to be in first grade. We had no kindergarten. And he'd sit across the street from the school on his little tricycle. And when we all went in, then he would ride his bicycle or tricycle home. And it was that little boy who this funny guy on the playground took and murdered. And of course, I'm only getting stories that I heard from my parents. Supposedly, he went out to look for the little boy in the search party. As a little kid, I knew that he was executed for that crime. And as a little one, I felt safe because he was no longer around. I don't know that I'm an advocate of that, but that's what I remember as a child. Something that on Sunday afternoon, my dad would go up to Chuck Jacobs and get a smoked fish. On the river there were several places where that smoked fish. And he'd bring a big fish home, and it would still be a little bit warm from the smoker. It was delicious. My children would probably have a fit if they had to eat that, but we loved it. I think the favorite fish was buffalo, which is a kind of carp, I believe. And carp is delicious smoked. It's not oily. It's delicious, but I can never find it anymore. My mother was the youngest of 14 children. So this grandmother I was only 12 when she died, so she always seemed very, very old to me. Yes, she used to make the best gravy I've ever tasted. But it didn't matter if there were 15 people at her table. The bowl of gravy was only this big. Plenty of meat, plenty of potatoes, but only that little dish, and I suppose it was so concentrated, that's what made it so delicious. She would have, at that time, when I was remembering, she had 8 remaining children. And as long as she was alive, there'd be gatherings at her house of everybody in the family. After she died, there was no one who wanted to host everybody, I guess.
What was her name?
My grandmother was Johanna, and Johanna Mosier was her maiden name. She came to this country by herself, and she must have had a way to have a job as, babysitter, housekeeper, I don't know. But when she arrived, she borrowed from this lady a piece of paper, a pencil, and a stamp, so she could write home and tell her parents that she had arrived.
If you were in front of a group of high school seniors and you had a chance to say some words to them, what would you say to them?
You know, I don't know that I can come up with advice like that. But with the little kids, that education is so important. That's the gateway to a full life. I don't mean money. I don't believe that money buys you happiness. But an open mind, receptive to new things, that's what I think makes people happy. That's what makes me happy.
How would you like to be remembered?
Well, I would love to be remembered as a nice and loving person. I don't know that I'll be remembered that way, but that's how I would like to be remembered. I would like to be remembered for having made an impact, good impact, on someone's life, but I don't know that's going to happen. I could have given you a lot of good advice if I didn't have children. They're the great, they instill humility in me.